Welcome to episode 122 of the Necronoma.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now, and I feel like I need a safety circle to protect me from our guest today. Don Guillory's here, everybody. Don, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, James.
Absolutely. Why don't you tell our listeners a bit about yourself?
Oh, gosh. Where do I start? I am an historian, educator. I co-host a podcast every now and then. I think it's called the Necronoma.com. And
Sounds wonderful.
Yeah, it has its moments. The other guy I co-host with, he's, but I know. But I've got a good number of works out. I should say at least a couple of good works. It just depends on your perspective whether or not they're good or not. I have my first horror / historical fiction novella, Bastions of Bayou, came out last year, and I've got a new one coming out that's a little bit darker, called Magnolia Lane, and just to as you and I talk about it every now and then, this whole idea of an elevator pitch, it is a haunted plantation tour. Ooh. And that's all I'm going to say, other than the fact that the genesis of this story was I was so pissed off about people going to plantations as if it was Disneyland, or they would go as part of some idea of, hey, this is a great place to get married, or in the case of certain game shows where people, try to date 25 men or 25 women at one time and determine that's going to be their soulmate. Pictures come up of them at an old South antebellum party where they all dress up as Southern belles and act as if that's okay and normal.
So I know you have some experience with visiting plantations in the area. You live in the South, and is that a pretty common thing? Like, if I was on a tour, is there going to be that one person who's like, oh, this would be a lovely place to have a wedding? And like, does that just constantly happen, or is it like occasionally? Like how bad is it?
I can already tell I'm going to get in trouble on this episode. Here's what I will say. There are certain organizations, let's just call them the United Daughters of the Confederacy, or the Confederate Veterans of America, or the Sons of the Confederacy, or whatever stupid podunk bullshit that they want to call themselves. They like to believe in this fairy tale about what the South was like and argue that it was this great place where Negroes were taken care of and slaves were taken care of and everything was all fine until the Civil War and those damn Yankees came down here and attacked and then uprooted their way of life. So much so that when the Northerners finally left, they had to bring in things like Jim Crow and, just assert their racial dominance. So basically what I'm saying is bullshit marketing by those organizations made it seem as though plantations were okay. When if I'm going to make any comparison, and by no means is this a fair comparison, and I'm not trying to make light of anybody else's suffering, but the only thing I could compare it to get people to understand is it would be the same as saying you should have a birthday party at Auschwitz, or you should have, your graduation party at one of the internment camps, in the United States, because these aren't places in which joyful stuff happened for a majority of the people that were living on those places. It's a place where people were forced into labor. They were brutalized, tortured, raped. Any number of things happened to these people that you would look at and say, how the fuck can a human being do this to somebody else? So in answering your question, yes, people ask that stupid question all the time about, or make those statements all the time about, oh, this would be a great place to have a wedding. And it is not uncommon for places, certain plantations in the South, to have weddings, parties, graduations, celebrations, things like that at the plantations and treat it as if it's okay. There is one exception that I know of And I want to give them a shout out. And this is also one of those things of, if you're listening to this episode, please support this plantation, this organization. There's a plantation outside of New Orleans called the Whitney Plantation. They are only focused on education, and they make it very clear this is not a place where you come and have a good time. This is not a place that you're going to book for a wedding because of what had taken place on that land to people. So I think in combination of the marketing and the poor education that we have with the antebellum period and with institutional slavery, with chattel slavery itself, so many people have kind of overlooked the negative things associated with slavery and tended to focus on the fairy tale aspects and the fairy tale side of what took place to kind of dress it up, because it's either out of their ignorance or it's a way of trying to avoid what actually took place because they might feel some guilt or some shame over it, when in reality it should be about learning what took place there so we can actually not make those same mistakes again or downplay what took place, like Texas is doing or other states have been doing for a while.
Yeah, I think we're going to see more and more of that, unfortunately. But no, I don't think that your comparison to Auschwitz is unfounded by any means. I mean, I don't know the numbers. I don't know if anybody does. You would know better than me. But like, so many people lost their lives to the system or spent their whole lives in the system and died naturally, or however you want to say it, you know. So I would never think that it's a positive situation by any means. So when I hear people say, I want to have a wedding here or stuff, like, I do think, like, I never thought like Auschwitz, but I think like I wouldn't fucking have a wedding at the 9/11 memorial. You know,
Right.
like I wouldn't go, hey, this is where Pearl Harbor, let's go here. You know, no, like none of that shit. I never understood it. And I do think, and again, I'm making assumptions. I've never even been to the South, so, or at least past Texas. I consider Texas the start of the South, and I've been to Texas. But
Well, they claim they're
past that,
their own country, so
yeah, exactly. You know, because seceding works well. But I feel like a lot of it comes from, I look at my skin and these are the people I identify with. So I think it's a good thing because it was rich white people and it was this glorious life with fancy dresses and parties and blah, 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 blah. And they're all concentrated on that part instead of what these people sacrificed from others to get that life. You know what I mean?
right.
And I think that gets lost. And that's where things like this terrifying critical race theory thing that people are talking about come in. No, I'm kidding. But you know, like actually learning about people who don't look like you or learning about the negative aspects of shit changes things really fucking fast. And I can't help but think that that's exactly why we're fighting teaching it, right?
Well, and one of the side projects I do is I do tours at the campus of the University of Mississippi, talking about how slavery is basically, and I'm using other people's research, and they've asked me to lead tours based off of their research, and it talks about how this university, and they're not alone, because there are many universities, not just throughout the South, but throughout the Northeast and the Ivy League universities themselves, that have a connection with the institution of slavery. So the key is learning what took place and not suppressing it, learning what took place and then passing that knowledge on to others, whether that is within your sphere, on social media, passing it down to the next generation. And what I've found, and it's not necessarily with this tour, but what I found with people who are resistant to those ideas, you know, whether it's CRT or just talking about slavery, talking about sexism, talking about homophobia, talking about all these ways in which we typically have marginalized groups, right? What people really come down to is as far as their fear is, they themselves are somewhat fearful of the way in which they may have treated someone in one of those groups, or someone they know is treated someone in those groups, and it's someone that they know and respect, and they're concerned that, my father, my grandfather, uncles, mom, grandmother, whoever it is, right? Somebody that they respect may have been one of those people who did that, who did those negative things by marginalizing somebody, might have been present at a lynching, might have, thrown bottles, or might have been that fireman who had a hose on kids or something like that. And I think their real fear is that's going to show, it's going to display a negative perspective on them from others, and state, well, that was how your family was, so you must be that way as well. And my argument always is, and it's almost like the Mark Twain argument about bystanders, which is in his article, or in his essay, I'm sorry, the United States of Lyncherdom, where he's like, it doesn't matter if you're opposed to it and you're quiet, right? What matters is you feel you have to go along with it because that's normal, and you're worried that somebody's going to single you out if you don't go along with this. When what you should do is stand up, because some other people may be in agreement with you, but those people are afraid to stand up because of this peer pressure that's been built into your gender, into your race, to where you feel as though you have to be there just for appearances to be safe. Because if they're doing this as far as lynching these people for this reason, they may then in turn make that turn that violence on you because they think that you might oppose it, or at least oppose the violence that they're displaying or enacting on these other people.
Well, I mean, that's incredibly relevant today by people staying silent for very similar reasons. So, yeah. I sit here and I have so many things I want to say, and then I'm like, what's the point? Like, I've been ranting for years and it hasn't changed anything. But so let's take this in a new direction. And why don't you tell me why you chose the skeleton key?
Well, first I'm going to say this. It's never a bad time to rant. So never stop ranting. And this is not just for you. This is for anybody out there, because there are a lot of times when we feel like we're screaming at a brick wall because of the people that we deal with in our personal or professional lives, or just in the public, that might be doing some of that nonsensical shit. So instead of looking at it as, and this is something I've had to work on in the past 15, 20 years, instead of looking at the assholes that we typically see in those videos from like the school board meetings or the protests or marches or whatever, some people are doing against the idea of CRT, which CRT is a college level legal course. It's not anything that's being taught to your kids, but I'm all for teaching it to your kids. As far as unteaching racism, unteaching homophobia, unteaching sexism, unteaching all that stuff to get these kids to actually be productive as they go on in later years. Because by not teaching it, what you end up doing is teaching them racism, sexism, and all these other things, because you're teaching them the way that you see the world as opposed to the way that the world should be operating. Which, if you don't step in and make some changes, the kids are just going to, just redo those cycles. But anyway, as far as what I've been working on the past 15, 20 years is not looking at racism or people who marginalize others as those illiterate, ignorant hicks, right? Because they're not dangerous. The ones who are dangerous are the people who believe those things, like women can't, be in the sciences, or black people can't do X, or Asian people can't do this, or whatever, right? It's the people that are in suits who actually have the power to enact legislation, or deny you a bank loan or housing, or deny you from entering the school or getting a job. Yeah. So those are the people that are really problematic. It's not the good old boy who's driving his Ford F-150. He might have some things going on, but he doesn't have the power to fuck up your life as far as getting a job or getting a house or anything like that. He just might be an asshole. So anyway, the reason why I chose this film, and it's one of those things. I didn't think about this movie Probably until about 2 years ago. I saw it when it came out in 2005. With a girlfriend at the time, we went to go to see this movie, and it was one of those typical. We're going to go see a scary movie because I'm going to be the big, strong man for my girlfriend, and she's going to jump and get scared and, grab my arm. All the stupid things you think when you're in your 20s or when you're a teenager. But when you're a teenager in your 20s, you're like, oh, man, she's going to get scared. She's going to be grabbing onto me. This is going to be awesome. So I didn't think about this movie again until maybe, I guess, a few years ago when we were at Phoenix Fan Fusion or whatever it was called at the time. And you and I were on a panel with Dr. Rebecca McKendry and a few other people. And I brought this movie up because I said it's heavily underrated. It has its problems, but it's heavily underrated as a horror film because it's bringing up some things and some issues that are often avoided in horror films. If there's a ghost story, it's old Molly and she murdered her children. It's a lot of cliched shit, right? Whereas in this movie, they take some of the stereotypical cinematic elements with voodoo and hoodoo, right? But they don't shit on it. And they don't do anything ridiculous with the movie or with the practices that are there that are disrespectful to people who actually believe in it, people who actually practice it. And they even go so far as to give you a little glimpse of something that happened one night to where it becomes a critique of American society as well. It's not just dealing with class or this idea of forgotten people or throwaway people or leftover people or somebody that's trying to find themselves. It gives you an idea of money and power, race and power, gender and power, and all the dynamics that are involved there that make you question a number of things, but definitely make you question where the film is going at several times throughout the film. And, there are often these questions about, movies that have had really good twist or great twist or whatever. This movie gives you like 5, 6, 7 twists. And when it gets to the last one, you're like, oh shit, that was good. That was a good twist. I think what pulls the movie back is it could have been executed better, but because at some moments it feels like it was rushed. But even now, as we talk about making a shorter film as opposed to 90-minute or a 2-hour horror film, right now that hour and 24 minutes of that film is perfect.
Dude, it flies. It flies. I had to pause, and I thought there was like 45 minutes left, and there were like 15 minutes left. And I was just like, whoa, how did I'm not used to that. I'm that guy that's always like, holy shit, there's still 50 minutes left. This movie flies. Yeah.
Yeah, because even with more recent films like Host from last year, that's just under an hour, right? It had that same pace of, well, some shit's about to happen. Something's about to happen. I'm not going to move. And even when I saw it in the movie theater, despite it being, the 84-minute runtime, there was no urgency of like, oh man, I've got my soda and my popcorn and now I got to go to the bathroom. There was never a moment in this movie, when I watched it the first time in the theater, watched it when it was on video, or when I watched it now that it's streaming, there was never a moment where I got up and I was like, all right, I need to take a break, because I felt as though even if I paused it, I was going to be taken out of the movie. This even way before when we could, you get up in a movie, go to the bathroom, come back a minute later, and ask your partner, your friends, whoever you're with, like, hey, what did I miss? I don't remember anybody getting up when I saw the movie in 2005. And I did not get up when I watched it this time. It could have been 2 hours and I probably wouldn't have gotten up because there were no slow moments. And even as I rewatched it this time, I'm looking for all the clues. Like, I talk about, other movies before where you watch it and you rewatch it. If it's something like Hereditary, where the first time I watched it, I did not like the movie. The second time I watched it, I got a little bit more into it. And by the third time and the fourth time I saw it, I'm looking for all those clues way before anything happens. And the filmmaking and the writing that is done so well to where you have those clues laid out that you don't pick up on them the first time you watch. And the same thing with this film, where all those clues are there. Every last clue is there as far as what is taking place, what's going to take place, and why certain things are happening. So, like, even the characters themselves. So you've got Cecile. You've got Cecile's character where, well, I'm sorry, well, she's not Cecile yet. But you have you have Kate Hudson's character, Caroline, who is a hospital or hospice worker, and you've got that foreshadowing just there at that moment where she's upset that she sat there, she's sitting with somebody as they're dying, and immediately packs up his stuff, calls the family, and she's waiting to like hand the stuff off to the family. And one of the nurses at the hospital is like, no, his family doesn't want anything to do with him. That's the first moment where you get an indication of who Caroline is, where she has that sense of loss, not just with the person that she's had to watch die, but that idea that somebody has been thrown away. And then when she's instructed, just take his box out back and put it in the dumpster, then she sees like 4 or 5 more boxes with people's names on it. And there's this old sketch or old skit or old bit by George Carlin where he says, life is about filling stuff up. It's about acquiring shit. It said, and at the end of your life, all your shit goes into a box. And yeah, you even go into a box. So that's all life is. It's just boxes. It's taking your shit, putting it in a box, moving it into another house, which is a box. And then you live in that box. And when you move, you put your stuff back into a box. And if you have too much stuff, you put it into a storage area, which is just another box. And he goes in talking about how our lives revolve around boxes. So when I saw this movie, again, like 16 years ago, when I saw it now, I immediately thought back to that George Carlin bit where he just talks about boxes, because this man's life, literally and figuratively, are put in a box, which is then put in another box. So, you know, all of his stuff is boxed up by Caroline, and then she goes and puts his box in the dumpster, which is another box. And she sees all these other people's lives that have just been abandoned. And, you know, she doesn't write any of these people off. She immediately thinks like this is kind of a fucked up situation just from her facial cues and her body language. I mean, I'm not a big Kate Hudson fan, and I'm not saying that to say like I don't like any of the stuff that she does. What I mean is that I didn't see this movie because of Kate Hudson. I haven't seen any movie because Kate Hudson was in it. But when I saw her in this movie, this is the one movie if somebody says, you know, what's a good Kate Hudson movie, or what's a movie that, you know, if you want to see what Kate Hudson can do, this is the one. I don't give a shit about Almost Famous or How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days or any of these. My Best Friend's Girl. Well, what I mean is by comparison, right?
No, completely. I love that movie. But if it wasn't Kate and it was somebody else, it wouldn't make a huge difference. No,
especially when she eats the sandwich, because it's so funny when she's, you know, they're talking about how she eats, and then she channels her inner mom as far as Goldie Hawn. She channels Goldie Hawn in that moment and makes the comical facial expressions. But in this movie, if someone were to ask like, hey, what's a movie where like Kate Hudson won you over? It'd be this fucking movie.
Yeah, I agree. She's great in this.
And in all honesty, I can't picture someone else in this movie. If they were to remake it, which, I mean, it would be great because then you'd have some new things that you could throw into it. But going back to the boxes thing, it's very remarkable the way that they kind of give you so much of her character as well as the storytelling just within that first 2-3 minutes, where you get an indication like, hey, she's working in the hospice, she's watching people die all the time, but it's not a thing where she's used to it, right? She feels that guilt because she wasn't around, and you find this out later, she feels this guilt that she wasn't around her father when he was dying, and by the time that he died, she didn't even know that he was sick. It had consumed him so quickly. but she felt guilt over, hey, I went to go live my life and go have fun. And, here my dad is, he's dying. And, we got into an argument. I left. I didn't know he was dying. I didn't know he was sick. And before I could do anything and come back, he's dead. So she didn't get to say goodbye to him. She didn't actually get to take care of him. She didn't get to do any of those things. So in that hospice care, she's actually the one that's sitting there talking to somebody as they're dying, which again is a remarkable thing for anybody who's working in a hospice to actually have to deal with that on a daily basis. My dad volunteered at a hospice for a few years, and his rationale was the same as what I saw in this film. He's like, some of these people don't have anybody, so they need somebody there to be there when they're leaving. So he's like, I just feel like, I need to do something about this. And so, he got his own therapy out that way by being in those places and sitting with them and then talking to their families when they would come in. But you get this idea that Kate Hudson's character, Caroline, is upset at the way the hospice itself treats these people, because he's like, oh, they're just treating them as if it's a business, or treating them as if it's a bed and all these other things. And her friend is like, it is. But even then, she's not satisfied. She's like, I want to actually do something where I'm taking care of somebody, watching for somebody, where it feels like it matters. And you have that job offer that comes through. And when she goes to visit the Devereaux family, it's again, when you watch it and then you rewatch it, you're like, holy shit, they were playing her from like the first second. Because when the attorney and Violet, and Ben is supposed to be an invalid. He's supposed to have suffered from a stroke and he's sick. He can't talk. He can't move. But the wife, Violet, looks at her and is like, no, you're not right for this place. And
she says that she won't understand this house.
Yes.
And I love that because it works on so many levels. But like, it really comes down to, if you don't believe what we're doing here isn't going to work. But it's such a great misleading statement, and it works on so many levels that she might not even be talking about that.
No, because when you first watch the film, in fact, the film is sold as a ghost story. It's sold as a ghost, as a haunted house movie, because I remember the promos for it. It was not sold as a voodoo story at all. It was sold as, this is a haunted house story. It's got old people in this house. It's got this young nurse or this nursing attendant that's going to be there. There's probably like the souls of people trapped in this house. And what I saw, and again, as I said earlier, since we've been recording, it's like you got like 5, 6 twists, probably more, that take place because they trick you just from the trailers and the promos. And it's not like the trick that some promos or trailers do, where it's like, hey, we're gonna oversell you on this story, and then when you come see this movie, it's gonna suck. This one was, hey, it's a ghost story. And then about 30 minutes into it, you're still, suspecting that it's a ghost story. And even with that line that Violet gives about like she won't understand the house, you're thinking like, oh, well, this whole thing she said about the mirrors. Okay, that makes sense. Ben saw a ghost in the mirrors, so that's why they're hiding all the mirrors. So let's not have one. And then there's a moment where you see something move in a little small mirror that Caroline has, and you're like, oh, fuck, there's one of the ghosts. So you're thinking, again, like, is the ghost going to do something to her? Is the ghost going to kill somebody? Is it going to lead somewhere and do something else? And then you start thinking like, well, maybe Violet is trying to kill her husband and she's making all this shit up. Like, what is going on here? But again, I think it's great with the storytelling, and looking at the reviews that it had, it I hate to say it pissed me off, but it disappointed me that people rated this movie, or critics rated this movie so low to where it had like a 38% rating out of 100. And in some cases as high as 3 out of 5. But
oh, wow.
To rate this movie that low, I think it's a little pretentious.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy, because it's way better than that. And I mean, you know me, I have huge issues with this plot and how some things play out. But This movie is a perfect example of how things should be. Like, it's fast paced, like you said, right? But like everything also hits really well. Like, it doesn't feel like the plot doesn't hold up until you're done with the film and thinking about it later. As you're watching it, it works really well. It's not one of those movies where I went, no, that's fucking stupid because this, blah, 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 you know? And,
yeah, so
and the
basically,
other thing,
you're not my mom when you're watching a movie then. Train to Busan, none of this makes sense. You mean nobody sees these zombies coming? I'm like, Mom, don't ruin this movie.
Nobody can ruin Train to Busan.
No.
But no, you mentioned the mirrors. And one of the things I love about it is this is the most realistic portrayal to me of what would happen with these mirrors. Because normally, like, you'd find them all broken, or they'd be like, they wouldn't even be on property, right? I love that they're just shoved in a storage room nobody goes to. I think that's great. Because that's what I would do in my own house.
Well, and the thing is, you wouldn't even think about it, right? If you happen to be the attendant there, like Caroline is, when you see the mirrors in the attic or in that extra space, right? You're not going to think twice about it. You're going to be like, well, shit, the story checks out. You know, she says she's old. She doesn't like looking in mirrors because she's old and doesn't want to see the wrinkles and blah, 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 blah. And then when she comes clean, or quote unquote comes clean, is like, well, it's because Ben saw a ghost, and the people that used to live in this house, they're still here. And he saw a ghost in one of the mirrors, and so I took all the mirrors down and I did this. Then you're like, okay, well, shit. The story that she keeps giving, it's making sense. It's lining up. But what was it about the plot that because you mentioned that, but I'm not going to let you off the hook. What do you mean as far as the plot that didn't work for you, or what didn't work for you as far as the plot?
There's just little things that just don't really add up. Like Ben.
Okay.
When Ben is suddenly able to climb out of his window and crawl across a roof when he hasn't been able to fucking move at all before this. And I get that he's off screen. Nobody's watching him. Off screen. Good fucking God. Let me try that again. No, we're not editing it out. I'm just an idiot. But yeah, he's somewhere where no one can see him and stuff like that. So I get it. But it would also be a lot of noise. And you can't tell me that no one would notice, you know, but it's so different that it kills that character consistency for me. If he was moving a little more before that, I could buy it. But as it is, it was the one part of the movie that I was just like, I get what you're going for, but I fucking hate it. Like, if he had even gone like into the hall instead, maybe, but the crawling out the window just totally a story up. No, I don't like it. You know, well, but it's shit like that. It's these little tiny, it's just these little tiny things where I feel like normally I would bitch about them. And in this film, it doesn't really matter except that one, because the rest just works so well that I'm okay with it.
See, and even with that part, I look at it as it's another, we're going to fuck with the audience. Right.
Sure.
And that's the excuse I gave for that. Because even when the attorney shows up, it's like, what do you mean he was climbing and he fell off the roof? That man can barely move. Where he's kind of like reiterating to where you kind of question, are they trying to gaslight Caroline as well to make her think like, oh, this really didn't happen, or you didn't see him? You know, this doesn't make sense. How would he fall out of the house? Like, were you watching him? Were you taking care of him? This doesn't add up.
And I'd like that more, especially following the sheet where the warning is gone. Like I would like it more because it would feed into that gaslighting feel. But you could even be like, were you trying to take him out that way? Like, even that would work a little better for me. But again, this is a minor complaint because everything works so well.
Well, before that, because I you know me, I have no problem going back and forwards with any movie. But even before she starts working there, I love the fact that her roommate, Joy or whatever her name was, I can't remember her name, but her roommate was like, "No, you probably shouldn't take that job."
Oh, Jill?
Jill.
I love Jill. Jill is TSA Jill to me. So I just want you to know. because
she
she's
does
the
show
smart
up at
black
the end.
friend telling people, "Hey, what the fuck are you doing?" So
No, I just love the fact that she's sitting there and I didn't, because you mentioned to me earlier before we started recording about the whole comparisons between this and Get Out, but even then I had to laugh at the whole idea of Jill is from the area.
Yep.
Caroline is not, and Violet makes sure to point out how she's so much of an outsider. She's like, well, we need somebody who's from around here, and that of course has to deal with the whole believing in this stuff, right? But then she's like, no, I'm from New Orleans. She's like, how long? It's like you don't sound like you're from there, and that's it. And you mentioned before about being in the South or being around the South and things like that. That's an interesting part of the South in itself. People from the South immediately recognize people who are not from the South. It doesn't even matter, what part of the South that you're in. So if you're, if you are in, outside of New Orleans, like this movie is, or is how it's set, or if you're somewhere in like Charleston, South Carolina, or Atlanta, or wherever, right? People that are native to that area, as far as like grew up there, maybe second generation, whatever, you get to understand who's from that place and who's not very early, very quickly. And it's very strong to where people have no problem asking you where you're from when they first meet you, because that's their way of trying to confirm their suspicions that, oh, this person's not from here. I had a New York Yankees shirt on when I went to go get some food last week. And this one guy saw me because, everyone's coming back for school. And this one guy looked at me, he's like, there have definitely been a lot of Yankees fans around here. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, I'm not having this fucking conversation with you. I'm not having this conversation with you. But yeah, that's very common where people will listen to your accent where my wife, she's from Mexico, for those of you who are new to the show, she can pinpoint your accent of what part of Mexico you're from, right? Mm-hmm. In the same way that people from the South can pinpoint what part of the South you're from based off of not just your accent, but also how you pronounce certain foods or words. It's the whole difference between, or even the terms you use. So, pecan or pecan, or I forgot what the other one was. But even then, people will fight you over that as far as the way it's supposed to be pronounced. Or crawfish, crawdad, crayfish, which crawfish is the only correct way to say it. It's the same way that people argue over GIF and GIF.
No one does that except you.
Oh, I don't care. It's GIF. The guy who named it he named it GIF. It's GIF. So anyway, I'm right. You're wrong. But that's a very good cultural inclusion, little tidbit that they throw into the film where Caroline is vetted at that moment by Violet, and Violet looks at it as, or at least as an audience member, you're seeing Violet as this crotchety old lady who doesn't like this young woman, because she even asked her about tattoos. Are you marked up? I know how all you young folks are with your needles and your ink and stuff. And you then question later in the film, or at least once you've seen the whole film, was she doing this because it was kind of like, I want a new body. I don't want one with tattoos.
Oh, definitely. Well, and I think that's another reason that she's like, well, you're not from here. You're not this, you're not that, because she distinctly says that she wanted a black body.
Right.
And I feel like this white girl with blonde hair shows up and she's like, nope, let's get rid of her. Like trying, but okay, really fast while we're on her arriving part. Can I just say this job pays like $1,000 a week and everyone keeps leaving it? That should be a giant fucking red flag, man.
Here's the thing. It should be a big red flag, right? But I'm sure in the back of her mind, it's Jill saying like, you want to go out into the bayou? There's gators and there's this and there's this. she's not saying anything about like there's a danger to you from other people. She's talking about a danger from the elements, right? So it may have been a thing of someone coming from the greater New Orleans area going out to Terrebonne Parish, and it's, oh God, there's nothing to do here. I need to leave. Or they get enough money to when, they get paid the, $2,000-$3,000 because they stay a couple of weeks. And they're like, all right, I'm done. I can't take this old lady anymore. She's really pissing me off. She's really salty. She's always in the way. Oh my God, this house is just a nightmare to be in. I don't want to be in here. You can look at it in so many different ways as far as what she may have been dealing with and wanting to avoid. As far as back in New Orleans, when I guarantee you she wasn't getting $1,000 a week at the hospice. Not the way the hospices worked, especially in areas like that. It wasn't it wasn't a lot of money.
Absolutely not.
And especially since it was 2000. I mean, the film comes out in 2005. So let's just say it's based on 2003. She might be making $8-9 an hour, maybe. Because your room is taken care of, like right.
Possibly your food. I don't know what kind of deal they got going on, and you don't want to eat anything this lady's making for you anyway. But I mean, on top of the money, like all these other amenities are there, and everyone keeps leaving. To me, that's a huge red flag. But I get why she goes for it. Plus, it's a horror movie. This is definitely not the easiest red flag ever.
Look, the first red flag
let's go have sex in the basement, cheerleader.
The first moment of the film where because it's not even a voodoo thing, it's just a culture shock thing where she stops at the gas station, fills up, right? She hasn't talked to anybody. She goes to the pump, fills up her gas, and then walks in and is like, hey, anybody here? And there's, nobody in the gas station. There's like rotten food everywhere. And as a horror fan, you're like, oh shit, there's a killer in there. She's about to die. This is going to be awesome. And you just realize it's just a rundown gas station that's family run. And it's, they've got their house and they just have the gas pumps outside. So it's kind of like, no, we really don't have that many people that come through, but the people who come through are people we know. So in a lot of those places, and this is really more so my dad growing up, if you did pump your gas, you just left the money behind because no one was really going to come in and take the money other than the owners. Because the owner might be in the bathroom. He might be watching his favorite TV show or something. And it's one of those communities where
kids.
It's one of those communities where everybody knows each other. So it's like, hey, Mr. Charlie, I just got $10 worth of gas. I'm going to put the money over here on the thing. And he's just sitting there watching The Price is Right, But it's great because she disturbs these people while they're in their home, but she's disturbed by the appearance of these people as well. So there's the woman who obviously has lost her sight. And then there's the daughter or the granddaughter that kind of guides her back and doesn't talk to her. And then what's a great touch for this film is you have a man who walks up, he's eating his oysters, and he's speaking Creole French to her. And it's funny to me because in those parts of Louisiana, you're not going to find people that are going to speak English to you first. You're going to find people who are going to speak English to you second. And in some cases, you're going to have an older generation where they don't speak that much English at all, because both my grandparents on my father's side, they spoke very little English. My grandmother more than my grandfather, but my grandfather spoke very little English. So if you came to his house and wanted to speak, like, the conversations were very short in English. Like when I would talk to him in English, it was simply like, oh, how's your mother? How's your mother doing? And I would say, oh, she's good. He said, oh, that's good. That's good. That's good. And then he would go on and, talk to my dad, or he talked to one of my aunts or somebody else or a visitor who happened to come to the house, and they would just be going back and forth. But what's great about this is you're starting to see that cultural difference that breaks once you get outside of urban areas, whether that happens to be New Orleans or Baton Rouge or places like Lake Charles. Once you get outside of those areas, it's a very rich and older culture that's mixing Haitian, French, Spanish, indigenous. You got a mixture of all those cultures coming together, and African. You got all those cultures coming together and creating something different from a good bit of the rest of the state. But I'm glad that they included that, because I think by not having someone speaking either Creole or Cajun French in this film, especially where they were, was going to be, it was really going to take something away from the film.
So I want to back up for just a minute. In the film, there's a quick definition of the difference between voodoo and hoodoo. My question to you, do you want to build on that? Or are you able to kind of give our listeners a breakdown of the difference?
Wait, what do you mean build on it? You mean you want me to do some shit right now?
Sure. I mean, I'm sitting here with a voodoo doll over here, but that's actually true because I got it from you. But no, I wanted your take on, do you agree with the definition in the movie, or do you have more to say about it? That's
no, that's the Cliff's Notes version. And there was this cute TikTok that went around last week or a couple of weeks ago, and it was making fun of the way that movies and TV represent New Orleans and Southern Louisiana all together. So it was this guy, and I can't do the accent, but this guy was like, "Hey baby, welcome to New Orleans," right? So he just gave his accent. But the funny thing was, he then said, and this is how it's depicted in movies, like, "Oh, welcome to New Orleans, baby. We gonna do some voodoo on you." And so it was like him with this big bonnet and bones and shit all around him. And it was funny because everybody who had lived in that part of New Orleans and that part of Southern Louisiana was commenting the same thing. They're like, it's not fucking like that. Why do the movies always present it like that? You can even go into a voodoo shop and it's nothing like that shit that you would typically see in a movie. And in fact, the way that they do it here, the definition that they gave in the film before I get too far into this, voodoo's the religion, and it's either spelled VOODOO, or it's VOUDOU, or VOUDOO. But that's just the religion. So it's just a mixture of African traditions and Catholicism, and sometimes indigenous, depending on where it is. But you have it getting its start in Haiti. And really what happened is, when there is the exodus from Haiti after the Haitian Revolution, you have people that then go to Cuba, take it to Cuba, and then from that split, some went directly from Haiti to Cuba, some went directly from Haiti to New Orleans, but the vast majority of the ones that went from Haiti to Cuba then went from Cuba to New Orleans to resettle. And as they did, they brought religious practices like voodoo with them. So voodoo is just simply, it's the religious structure. And in the film, they break it down, or Jill breaks it down really easily. She says hoodoo is just the shit that you do. So it could be anything from, as they do in the movie, by laying brick dust, around your entryways, or salt, or this is my favorite one, or for those of you who don't know, and this is a horror podcast, so every now and then we're going to bring up something a little bit grotesque. If you were ever in Louisiana itself, I'm just going to stick with Louisiana, and you are dating someone, don't ever eat anything that they prepare at home until you are seriously committed in a relationship. Because some people are taught to put bodily fluids into the food that they prepare, and then they serve it to you as a way to have control over you. And I mean, as far as not control as far as we're going to turn you into a slave, but to make it to where you fall in love with them. You already like me, we're dating, I like you, but I'm going to do this to make sure that we're linked. You can't break away from me. If you want to Google the bodily fluids that are used, be my guest. But yes, it is something that some people do. So just be careful. Especially if they don't eat the food as well. Whereas when in this film, when Violet is actually eating the gumbo, that's pretty much a signal that it was safe to eat, because no one is going to if they're eating with you, for the most part, it's safe to eat what they're eating. If they serve you something and it's, oh no, I already ate, don't fucking eat it.
So would you say the representations in the film are pretty accurate?
I think they're pretty safe, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
It's not exploitative, because I had this conversation with my dad like years ago about family and stuff like that, because I was just talking about voodoo for some reason. And so he's like, oh yeah, your great grandmother practiced it. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? It's like, some like the bones and all this other shit. He's like, no, that's the fucking movies, right? And this is, I think we had this conversation in the 90s. It's like, that's the movies. That is not how this shit is done. Really, it is simply like even the voodoo dolls themselves, right? The voodoo dolls are really supposed to inform somebody. And we're talking about a group or community that literacy rates are not that high. So you would go to your local healer and tell them where it hurts, and you would just stick the pin in or use the pin to point where it hurts on your body. And they would then give you something, herbs, or they would give you a little concoction to deal with pain or to deal for what's the term? A more gentle pregnancy, right?
Okay.
But it wasn't a thing of like, oh, baby, you're going to take this right here. And then, this person's going to die. Now, there were some times when it's like, oh, if you want to poison somebody here, put this shit in their food. But it wasn't a thing of like, hey, give me this doll of Mr. Jenkins and I'm going to stab the doll and he's going to have a heart attack, or I'm going to break his leg and the leg is going to break in half. Again, that's the movie shit, which if that worked, again, it's one of those things of they would have to believe in it working, and I can't get somebody to believe in a doll that I'm using on them from miles away that they have no idea that I'm using. Again, it's a movie thing. Now you might pray for someone to hurt themselves, or you might feel as though your ancestors are going to have some input into harming somebody, but there's not a situation where it's like, hey, I'm gonna stab this doll 10 times and this person's going to get shooting pains in their arms and legs or their heart or wherever, or they're going to get cancer or something. But I would say even when they have the voodoo practitioner that's there, she's not done in a comical or caricatured way.
No,
it's still
great.
It's still in a respectful way, because here's the one thing I will say with anybody in the New Orleans area, in southern Louisiana, in Haiti for that matter, or even in parts of Cuba. When it comes to that shit, they're very serious about making sure it's respected. So I'm pretty sure that the film crew itself, or those involved in filming this movie, decided like, we want to ask some people what it's actually like, because we don't want to get this wrong, and we don't want to be part of that whole thing of like, oh yeah, we're going to have fun with this and make fun of, oh, we're going to have a voodoo doll and we're going to do this. And, we're going to throw one out of the window, and then Kate Hudson's character is going to go flying through the window too. Which again, if they'd done that, I would have walked out of the movie.
If they'd done that, I don't think we'd be talking about it right now.
No. I mean, we would be making fun of it. But
sure.
Even when Jill like shows Caroline, like, that's where it is. And Caroline's whole thing is like, but that's a laundromat. She's like, I don't know what goes on in there. I just know this is where my parents went. And that was what some people did. It was like a side thing. It was not a side hustle, but it was something that people did on the side because it was passed down to them. Like, here are some herbs, here are some plants that you can work with. And in all honesty, because there is that mixture of African and indigenous culture and beliefs and practicing, there is a lot of the holistic stuff, like using plants, which, if you think about aspirin itself comes from willow bark tree, or the willow bark of, the bark of willow trees. So, I mean, it has it's naturally derived, right? So even things like chicory, I think chicory is supposed to calm your nerves or calm your anxiety. So some people would chew a piece of chicory. So that was kind of where it came from, was these people understood what plants to use or how to mix certain things together to make you feel better or to soothe a burn or a bite or any of these things. And it gets, again, with movies and with stories, it gets conflated into being this whole thing of, oh, these people are communing with Satan. And, also you have to deal with evangelicism, where they're trying to degrade, religions like voodoo itself as something demonic and ridiculous. When what some people in various religions have pointed out, which, especially even with voodoo, people who complain about voodoo, those who would respond would say things like, well, if I were to take your religion, since you're complaining about my religion, but if I were to take your religion, don't you guys celebrate cannibalism? And because I remember watching this one debate where this was going down, and the person said, well, Christians celebrate cannibalism. And they said, well, what the hell do you mean? It's like, every Sunday you say, this is the body, this is my body, eat of me. This is my blood, drink of me. How the hell is that not the same thing? Instead, it comes down to symbolism and metaphors. We're not actually drinking each other's blood. There may be
I'm not going then.
There may be a sacrifice of an animal, but it's no different than the sacrifices that you would see in Christian religion itself, or even in Islam. And even when the sacrifices are made, it's done in a religious manner where there's praying, and it's not a thing of we're wasting this animal's life. Even when I was asking my dad about some of the stuff that, was done when he was a kid, he was like, if you took any of the stuff from when he was growing up and made it for a movie, it would get ridiculously caricatured, because they would have this thing called a boucherie. And when I asked him about it, he said, well, basically it was this. Some people would come in, you'd have a hog or you'd have a cow or whatever, and you would kill it a certain way, right? And then you would then cook it, and people from the this is all farmland. You'd have neighboring people come in, and you would just celebrate together. It was just a boucherie. All you're celebrating is the killing of this animal. So I'm like, how would that get turned? He's like, well, because in the movies they make it seem like every time we would kill an animal, it was to, it was to make a pact with the devil, or it was supposed to be, whatever. He's like, no, when we were doing that, it was because we were having a good year, and it was like we wanted, we'd have it as part of the church experience. So you'd have Catholicism wrapped up in it as well. So I'm sitting there like, damn, that food must have been good. And it was just like, the boucheries themselves, like, it's not that popular anymore because so many people moved away. How are you going to throw, a party for so many people with one hog when nobody really does that anymore? So it would still look weird. Like, even when the times I've been in Mexico, they did similar stuff where it's like, we had a wedding, so we're gonna kill a cow. And my wife had the nerve to ask me if I wanted to go and watch when they killed it. And I said, no, I'll eat it. I'm not going to go and participate. I will definitely eat whatever burrito tacos we have. Because even
they're
the guy
coming
who's
for you weren't out there when they made the kill, so they're coming for you.
Yeah, exactly. The return of the cows. But even then, like, there was a certain knife that you had to have. I mean, I'm speaking for the family that I was staying with when we were in Mexico. They're like, no, we have to do it with this particular knife because it's the most humane thing for that animal. So this is something that's going to kill it quickly, as opposed to it's going to be something that, is going to cause the animal a lot of pain, and then it's going to release a chemical. I forgot what chemical they said, but something from the adrenal glands. But it's going to release some chemicals that'll make the meat taste different. So even when they're explaining, like, this is why we do it this way. And from the outside, from an outsider, it would look strange. For those on the inside, it's an everyday experience. And I think the best thing I can use, or at least one of the better articles I could use to explain it, is there's Miner's The Body Ritual of the Nasarima, where it's this article that was written to make people think about their own ethnocentrism and their own perspective in life, right? So he writes this 5 to 6 page article, and as you're reading it, you're thinking in terms of like, oh, these people are so backward, they're so uncivilized, they're doing X, they're doing Y. And at the end, you realize he's writing a paper about Americans themselves. He just breaks down everything that we do the same way that anthropologists and sociologists break down other cultures and try to claim that they're uncivilized or they're backwards. And it's like, if you look at us from the outside and you change the language, we are backwards, especially the way that we view things. Like, if a woman is pregnant, or if they updated, they would have breastfeeding. If a woman is feeding her child, she has to hide, or people will chastise her openly and publicly for feeding her children. And you're like, what the fuck is wrong with these people? Why are they being mean to these women who are just trying to feed their children? And then you realize we're talking about the assholes that run up to women and tell them they shouldn't breastfeed in public.
I mean, we got to do whatever we can to control others, right?
Exactly.
Hey, what'd you think of the music in this film? Because it's very purposely chosen, obviously, and plays a huge role towards the end.
Which music are we talking about? Are we talking about the soundscape and the score, or are we talking about the records that start to play?
I mean, I'm talking about the records, but if you want to talk about the rest, that's cool too. Just whatever you want.
Well, no, we were talking about pace earlier, right? So when it came down to the pace, I think they did a great job in choosing the right score, or creating the right score for this film, because it keeps the right amount of tension at all moments of the film, to where you are questioning, even in the moments when, it's bright, and Violet's in her garden, feeding and repotting plants and things like that. You still have this moment of like, you're unsettled because of everything that's taken place and the pace in the film. But even the other music that gets used, or hell, I'll even go back this far. In the beginning, when Caroline first chooses the job, or decides she's going to take the job, and she and Jill are out drinking and hanging out, that scene could best be described as comparison to Marie Laveau's Snake Dance. And I didn't think about it the first time I saw the film, because I didn't know that much about the Snake Dance and the history of it. But the way that the crowd itself is dancing, moving together, it's almost as if everybody in that room is in a trance. Even Caroline herself. The way that they're all moving to the music itself, and music itself is a very powerful thing to get people into whatever mood that you're going to be in, whether that's in an amorous mood, or angry, or happy, or whatever, right? You can use music for a lot of different moods and for a lot of different rationale. And I think by having the music, even though it was New Orleans style jazz, the music itself was upbeat, but it was still unsettling, because you're already being geared up for something is going to happen. And the shots that they make in this film, especially when they're dancing, it makes it look as though you're being put under a trance, which then again becomes one of those things that becomes a reality later in the film. But I think that the overall use of music and the different, and the musical pieces that were chosen were, one, purposeful, but it was also to screw with Caroline's character, which was great. Because every moment that she thinks like, okay, well, maybe it's not X, something happens and it completely just throws her off.
Yeah, they do a great job of making her believe by doing these things that throw her off. But that does bring up another one of my points that I have a slight issue with. When she's going to the attic door at that one point,
okay,
like, why does it shake? What the fuck makes it shake? It's nothing back there. I know that that's there to scare the audience, but that's one of those plot points that I'm like, what the fuck? But
James,
as
it
I was
was
sitting here,
obviously the ghosts that were in the attic, man. They were trying to get out. Didn't you see all that dust and everything fly up? They were running. No?
but no, going back to what I said earlier about him climbing out the window and crawling away, I realized the medicine was poisoning him the whole time and making him paralyzed and all that shit. So I guess I can write that off as the medicine stopped working because she didn't give him enough to get through the whole night for some reason. And he was able to crawl out that one time. So I'm okay.
Well, I think she even said like, "Oh, I'm going to double his dose tomorrow or something," right? And I'm like, "All right."
What could possibly go wrong? And then on that note, why in the fuck at the end do they let Ben and Violet go to the hospital? If these meds are what keeps them from talking and walking and whatever else, and you're not going to give it to them anymore, why would you let them leave?
All right, here's why I would answer how I would answer this, because this was my thought the first time, but then as I thought a little bit more about it, who the fuck's going to believe him? And I mean this in all seriousness. We look at the elderly, and especially since Ben is the executor of all their shit now, right? He has now passed, or at least gotten the property and everything in Caroline's name. So it's all hers now. And they have no reason to basically say, well, oh, she was scheming these people. She was working with these people, because she doesn't know Ben, right? I mean, it's Violet in Caroline's body. But anybody on the outside would look at it and say, well, it obviously this woman hasn't done anything to them. Ben has been their lawyer. Ben got hired by Violet before she took ill, and he can then say, like, her health has been deteriorating, and Ben, not Ben, Luke the lawyer.
Yeah.
Luke didn't know Caroline, so Luke is the executor of this property for Ben and Violet, and he can definitely vouch and then put up, not a protective order, a conservatorship, to where they don't get to do anything. Like, hey, here's the medication that they need to have while they're in the hospital, or here's what they need to have here while they're in hospice or whatever. But if they do come to, and this is a sad thing as far as how we treat the elderly, they're not the doctors, the nurses, whatever hospital they happen to go to, or whatever assisted living care they happen to go to, people aren't going to believe them. Oh, really? You were possessed and somebody switched bodies with you? Okay, Grandma, whatever you say. What's your real name? Oh, you lived in this place? Okay. I don't see them actually doing that, because you look at it this way. How is Caroline, now in Violet's body, going to be able to, Caroline now in Violet's body, how is she going to be able to contact anybody? How is she going to be able to get the freedom to actually do any of that stuff? Because Luke could easily go to the hospital or the assisted living facility or wherever they end up going, because he's going to be able to put them wherever he wants to put them. And he could have orders like, no, do not let them use the phone unless they call me. They can only talk to me because, they've got dementia. All their kids are dead, or they don't have any kids. They don't have anybody they can go to. And even Caroline, who is now in Violet's body, there's no one she can call other than Jill. But then Jill would probably look at it like, okay, crazy old lady, whatever.
Okay, so I get all that. It just seems like it'd be way easier to just fucking kill him.
It would be.
You don't need him anymore.
But then you have to deal with the whole idea of making it look like an accident, right? Or at least not having any suspicion around you if you do kill them. But I just like the ending because it's almost one of those things where, as a viewer, you watch it, it's like, oh, fuck, that was pretty cool the way they did it at the end. But they get rid of them so quickly, and then they have that cute little moment at the end. I like to call it cute. That cute moment at the end where Cecile, in Caroline's body, makes this, I'm paraphrasing, I really wish we could have had a black one this time. But the black ones don't want to come out here. They don't want to do this.
That should be another red flag.
It's no, I mean, just at the end, I just love how that whole thing of like, they're like, but none of them will come out here. This isn't fun. I was really hoping to be a black person this time. But and we didn't go over this part, which I think is important, and it was important in the film. And I think if they were to redo this movie, not that I'm calling for them to redo it, I think they should go even further back in time. So it's not the 1920 when this takes place, but this is in the antebellum period when Cecile and Papa Justify take over the bodies of the children. So in the film, Papa Justify and Cecile were domestic workers for the Devereaux family, for the family that was living in the house. It was a banker, and he had a wife and two kids, and basically they have this. I'm going to say they had a drugged up, because it wasn't just alcohol at that party. They had a drugged up, alcohol fueled party, and the kids are missing. The two kids, a boy and a girl, are missing. And so everyone starts looking for him. They find him in the attic, and the family and everybody catches the kids and Justify and Cecile in the middle of a ceremony where you find out later they're switching bodies with them. But what's disturbing about this whole scene is the way that Violet describes it. And you don't realize she's describing it from her own experience until later. But the way she describes it, it's almost as if it's a secondhand story, because she's talking about, oh, yeah, then they found, Papa Justify and Cecile in the attic with the kids, and they decided to lynch them. So you see this quick scene where it goes from the family's having fun, drinking and partying and celebrating, and then they can't find the kids, so they turn it into a game where they have to go find the kids. And when they find the kids, it turns into this blind rage and hatred where they decide, hey, I know what we're going to do. We're going to hang the black male servant and the black female servant, and then we're going to burn their bodies. Which gets into a lot of things involving lynching and violence to, racialized violence at the time, but also class violence, because it's all people of means. And then you have the bodies of these two people that were laborers, that were domestics, that don't have any power, at least any economic power at this time. You find out later that he had the spiritual power, because there's this one woman who's, saying like, oh, nobody ever figured out that spell. We heard that Papa Justify figured it out, but, we don't know if he ever did it, because the spell isn't going to make you immortal. It just gives you a longer life, because you borrow the years from the person you switch with. But that whole scene itself, when she's retelling it to Caroline, I think that it's a very sanitized version for 2005. In 2021, I think it would be something that we'd have a much deeper conversation about, as opposed to, oh yeah, they just found the two people, they lynched them, burned them, and they went about their lives. And then the kids took over the house, and they lived in the house, and they then sold the house to us, and we've been living here since 1962, and now you're here.
No, I think that was a great way to do it, though. I love that it's not it's not a plantation that's handed down with the same family. They didn't attack them. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, I thought that was a nice change. Like, that it was just whoever ends up in this area, we're going to suck the life years out of you because we have to keep going. And I thought that symbolism also works really well in regard to slavery, because it's not about who you are. You could be anybody, but you're here and you're a slave now, and we're going to trash your life because it's unimportant to us as long as we keep getting what we want. And I thought that juxtaposition there was a really cool little, I don't know, it's just a cool detail.
It was great to include. I mean, like I said, they sanitized it because that didn't need to be the focus of the story, right? But I think, like I said, I think for a 2021 audience, there would be a deeper conversation about that scene or there would be revisiting of that scene.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be, I think the way it would be updated now, it would be Violet is, as far as they're in the attic, Caroline is in the protection circle. Violet has the mirror and she's like, oh, ever since, I don't know, she gives some other monologue where she talks about how seeing my own body burn up with the child inside, really showed me how evil people could be or whatever, but I didn't think, I didn't lose any sleep over my decision to switch places with it. It could have been any number of things. But then I also question, because this wasn't a situation where Papa Justify and Cecile were running from something and they switched with the children. I think it was something where it's like, oh, we're going to try it out to see if it works. And holy shit, it worked. But then you get caught in the middle of this, but the people are so angry, they end up killing the wrong people. They go after the people they think are responsible for it, as opposed to the Cecile and Justify, who are now in the bodies of the children.
Yeah, I love that. I think that's such a great twist in itself. Like you said, there's like 7 twists, but like that could have been like the capstone twist to some film, And in this, it's just what started it, and I love that.
Yeah, and again, I think this movie is heavily underrated. It's a movie that I could watch. I didn't get tired of watching it again, even though it's 16 years and there's been a lot of changes with film, a lot of changes with storytelling. There was nothing that I look back at this film and said, like, I couldn't watch this again. It was refreshing to watch it, despite some of the things that are problems with some of the storytelling, whether that's some of the, like you brought up, the whole thing of of Ben being outside, or even the sheets missing, which then again you start to figure out, oh well, that was Violet screwing around with her. It wasn't Ben. It was her to get her to. It was Violet to get Caroline to believe that something was going on. Which again, it's a masterful way that they're manipulating Caroline. And even then, Luke the lawyer, played by Peter Sarsgaard.
Yeah,
great flip or twist with him, because you're thinking he's on the up and up the whole time, right? And then you start to have some questions about him. Then you go to the office and you see these, basically How to Be a Lawyer for Dummies books. And you don't
loved that.
And at that point, you're not thinking like, oh, he must be somebody in somebody else's body. You're thinking like, oh, this dude is a fucking con artist. I mean, that was my first thought was, oh, he's not really a lawyer. He's a con artist. He's trying to get over on this little old lady and this husband. He's trying to get over on them somehow, or he's trying to get something out of them. And
yeah, it misdirects in such a great way, because now you think he's the one behind it instead of the people we've been concentrating on the whole time.
And then you further think that when he, grabs her from behind and then chokes her out, because then you think like, oh shit, he's trying to, okay, well, what's his game now? What is he doing? So it again, they play with so many people's suspicions and misdirections throughout the film, to where you really don't know what is taking place until probably the last 5 to 10 minutes of the film. And it's great the way they do it. I'm glad they didn't do it early, and then you spend the next 30 minutes saying like, oh well, how is she going to trick them into, or how are they going to trick her into, into being able to steal her body? And then you realize they played the long game, which was, we just need to get you up in that attic to put yourself in the circle, because we can't do it. And even that it well, even that this was the only other thing that bothered me about the movie. And it's not even a thing about the storytelling, it's just the character. So Caroline, she goes to the voodoo practitioner, not doctor. I just want to clear that up for people. This voodoo practitioner. And when she goes to her, she gets, these oils, she gets these herbs, crushed flowers, all these different things to basically do a ceremony, to actually do some type of cleansing with Ben to get him to talk to her. But what bothered me, and I was, when my wife was watching it with me when I rewatched it, and I was just like, this part kind of pisses me off. She's like, what do you mean? She's like, okay, she goes to a voodoo practitioner one time, and all of a sudden she knows what the fuck to do. And she pointed out, she's like, she probably gave her instructions. Like, no, I don't accept that, because even then she's like, oh, I'm cleansing the spirits, and she's like, she has the crow's feathers over his face, and then starts, rubbing him with the oils and the water and the herbs that are in the water and stuff like that, burns the candle. And I'm sitting like, this is too easy for her. Like, there should be a little bit of reservation, but I'm like, no, you're going to lose the pace if it's like, I'm unsure. But she gets built with so much fucking confidence from doing that one time that when she finds the protection spell, right, she's like, oh, I know exactly what to do. And when the twist happens, it's like, that's what you fucking get. That's what you get for fucking with shit you don't understand. Where she makes this protection spell. She puts the salt and everything around her. She makes the drawings with the chalk. And it's immediately it becomes one of those asshole moments for a character that you want to root for, because she starts laughing at Violet. She's like, haha, I've been able to do it. You can't do anything to me because I have a protection spell. And just beautifully, Violet turns to her and is like, oh, yeah, that's not a protection spell against people. That's a spell to keep you in the circle.
What a great moment.
Oh my God. I can't remember if I clapped at that part or if I laughed when I saw it originally, because I was like, oh, you fucking idiot. Like, you really screwed yourself over with this one. Because I mean, it was just one of those things where, why would you? I get the not knowing the full ramifications of what you're doing in some cases, but the idea that she immediately thinks, because she knows at this point that Violet is into this shit. How were you going to outdo somebody who has been doing this for a while? I mean, it would be like Daniel LaRusso beating up Mr. Miyagi after the second lesson that he's gotten. Like, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
He'd use an illegal move, so.
Well, Daniel LaRusso actually is the villain, just to clear it up for everybody.
Do you have anything else to add before we move to recommendations?
Well, we can go to recommendations. I mean, the stuff that I have, I've pretty much called it out. I wrote down the fucking audacity of this woman to do hoodoo with no training.
I love that, because I didn't even pick up that that's a problem, and now I'm like, man, that's a huge problem. That's fantastic.
This goddamn blonde, blue-eyed woman going in here and doing this shit. When Jill told her it's an African indigenous thing.
Should have understood the house, and she wouldn't have had this problem.
Exactly. But the only other thing I would say, it's really just something I find remarkable about the film, is they take full advantage of how people deal with grief. So with Caroline's character, she feels guilty about the loss of her father, to where anybody else, and that kind of explains when you talk about the red flags, anybody else would have left, but she feels so guilty about her father that she's like, I'm not going to leave Ben here. I'll take him with me wherever I'm going to go. But you see how she feels obligated that she has to stay for him. She doesn't give two shits about Violet. Her thing is Ben is somebody she needs to protect. She needs to look after. And that's the only reason why she should stay. Which again is a rational reason to stay if she still feels that guilt over losing her father.
I love it. All right. So this is the part where we move into movies you might like if you liked this movie. And normally I let the guest go first.
But your guest has 100 picks.
But not today. So my double feature for this is, of course, Get Out. You knew I was going with Get Out. There's a great video on YouTube about how they're very similar movies. And what I liked about it was, as funny as the video was, I still wouldn't get sick of watching these together. I think they would actually really power each other up even more. And it's a very, very cool trend of, putting souls, I guess, into different bodies or that kind of thing. And there's just so many other little nods to each other, probably not purposefully, but I feel they'd go really great together. There is actually a double feature DVD, because I looked it up to see, and they have The Watcher with Skeleton Key, and that could be cool too. But yeah, I'm going with Get Out. So what do you got?
Oh man, I got you. So since Get Out is off my list, I actually did think about this in double feature terms. So there's one film that I paired up with this one to be a double feature, and it would have to be none other than Eve's Bayou. Nice. With Lynn Whitfield, Megan Good, Samuel L. Jackson, and Jurnee Smollett. Great film. It's another one of those movies that's underrated, and it's talking about a culture. I'm a little biased on this one, but a culture that does not always get represented in film in a correct way or an appropriate way, because they're not creating caricatures with this one. They're making a film that involves a respectful portrayal of a South Louisiana culture. Some other films that I would say that if you like this, you'll definitely like The Village. I know James would say like no, because he thinks I'm going to say The Happening right after that, so I'm not going to say it right after.
You're going to wait one film before you say it. Cool.
Let's see, Ma, Veronica, Devil.
Oh, Ma would be another really cool double feature. Yeah, I love that.
The Mist. Got 1408 as well. The Others. The Hitcher. Now with The Hitcher, I would say the original or the remake. The original is always going to be the one I would recommend more, but I think both of them, either one of them would fit. Last House on the Left, The Crazies, The Orphanage, House on a Haunted Hill. And if you like John Hurt in this movie, check him out in Alien when the alien actually bursts out of his stomach. And if you like, let's see, if you like Gina Rowlands in this film, she plays Violet. If you liked her in this film, you'll love her in another movie called The Skeleton Key. I'm sorry. To go along with The Skeleton Key, if you want to do a double feature with her, The Notebook. Oh man. That's one of the scariest movies I've never seen. I've heard of it. Never going to watch it. And thank God my wife does not like quote unquote chick flicks, because I would probably gouge my eyes out and ears.
It's a great movie about domestic violence. It's fantastic. But going back to John Hurt, I wanted to say this earlier and I totally forgot. He turns in a fantastic performance. He doesn't even speak in the movie, and he's so good. Like everything in his facial expressions and his fear, and like I know he's a great actor, but wow, I was so impressed all over again with him here.
Well, he's Mr. Ollivander. So, I mean, no, but you're 100% right, because that was another thing I read when they were critiquing this film, which was, oh, he's wasted in this movie. Like,
no, he not.
Like, there's no fucking way. Like, even when he has that moment where Caroline shows him the mirror, which I thought was a dick move. because it's already been explained to her. Hey, he saw something in the mirror, and that's when he saw a ghost and he had a stroke, whatever. Right?
Let me let you have a stroke in the bathtub. That's a great idea.
Yeah. It made no sense as a viewer. It's great because you're thinking like, oh shit, what is he going to see, right? But then you don't understand until the end of the film why the mirror would be traumatic for him, and it's the whole thing of like it's that further realization that he's not in his body.
Yeah,
and imagine how any of us would feel to where you're at a place and then the next thing you know you're in a completely opposite body, different person, much older, much younger, and you're no longer you anymore. And exactly what that would entail. I mean, it was, yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. Like I'm going to say that the main four of this film, other than Sarsgaard's bad accent, the main four of this film did a great job in their roles. Like there wasn't anything I think that any of them did that detracted from the film.
No.
As in their performances. I think there were some things that could have been done better as far as writing or in some of the lines, things like that. But I mean, especially Gina Rowlands as the villain in this film, outstanding.
Absolutely. So let's bring it back to you, Don. Why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you online and when your new book comes out and how they can order it?
Of course. You can find me pretty much anywhere online. My Instagram is the Token Black Guide. My website is donaldrguillory.com. On Twitter, especially on Sunday nights, you will catch me tweeting about one of the greatest trashy TV shows of all time, 90 Day Fiancé. My Twitter is at Don Guillory. Facebook, I have my author page, which is Donald R. Guillory as well. And then there's a website that a social media account that I've been able to get back onto. And I just go by Token Black Guide on there. It's TikTok. And then the books themselves, you can either get them from me, and if you order them from the website, of course, I'll sign them and personalize them for you. Or you could help Jeff Bezos build another rocket and go into space by getting them from Amazon, or hopefully you can just order them through like a local bookstore. I'd rather you do that. But the Magnolia Lane is going to be out by the time this episode airs. So I would love your support. If you definitely hate people who go to plantation tours out of fun, you will see how I was able to have a very cathartic experience in writing this book. So hopefully you enjoy it. And this is part of something that James and I talked about before, which is taking history itself and merging horror with it. So whereas this book, it was about, with the last book, Bastards of the Bayou, it was about a small town when I was going to do some research, but I didn't have enough sources to use to make a scholarly article. I decided to take the information from that town and turn it into a fictional work that has a little bit of horror involved, a little bit of suspense. And then the current book is more of a fuller mixture of horror and history. And going forward, taking James's advice, I'm just going to be merging the genre of horror with different periods of history as well, involving all types of marginalized communities, historical events that some people may not be familiar with, but I'm going to use to get that out there so that some people can be more familiar with things like the internment camps, sundown towns, discrimination and prejudice in so many different ways, and how horror can kind of emerge in those areas. Some
Fantastic.
Fictional characters may be involved.
And then would you say you've ever written a nonfiction book?
I did, but considering the way that certain people are responding to the CRT, I'm afraid I might have some. No, I'm just kidding. I don't give a fuck about them. The only work I have of nonfiction is my first work, which again was another cathartic experience, is the Token Black Guide, which talks about historical and personal experiences with race and discrimination Some are funny stories. At least I say they're funny because pain plus time equals comedy. And then some other ones are more informational, painful as well. And in some circles, it's actually being used for instruction and inclusivity and diversity programs. So definitely check that one out as well if you're looking to learn a little bit more about race and culture as well. And also check out my TED Talk or my TEDx talk. I don't think there's a difference, but just Google me and TEDx and you'll find me, and I'll talk for about 10 minutes about telling stories and why they matter and why you should definitely collect any relative stories that are there, because you don't want to have time pass by and you don't record it and we end up losing those family members or friends who had some great stories or great experiences in their lives.
Love it. All right. Well, I guess that wraps it up for this week then. So, as always, I am James Sabata. Oh, he's not here. I forgot. Hopefully my co-host will be back next week. We'll see you here at thenecronoma.com.